I just want to do God's will.
What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. Good to have you guys here today. We're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about some kind of current event kind of things that are going on. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about Elon Musk and Twitter. That's sort of a big topic. But we're going to talk about what's going on in Ukraine, some things here in our own country. And all of this, everything we're going to talk about today is wrapped in this idea of prayer. And so we'll talk about the importance of prayer. Does it really change things? Does it matter? How do we do it? How do we engage? And so I'm excited to have the CEO and president of Intercessors for America with me. His name is Dave Kubal. He's been on before and enjoyed the conversation then. In fact, he was in our studios here for some broadcast shows just yesterday. And those air, actually, his program airs on July 4th, which is an interesting thing with the way broadcast works. It's one reason I like the live. You get things here on the live show because we're here today. We're talking about what's going on right now. Somebody like Mayor can have a little input because chat is open. So I invite you to be a part of the conversation. Hit share, hit like, hit follow, hit subscribe, and welcome my guest today, Dave Kubal. Dave, great to have you back on Life Today Live.
Randy, great to be with you again, sir.
So there's a lot going on, and I want to kind of run across the board. I'd really like to start with Ukraine because it's kind of a weird deal because like it was 24/7 news for about the first couple weeks, and now we kind of see updates on it. We know there's a war going on over there, but what are you seeing? What are you seeing? What are you doing? How are you praying? What's your view of Ukraine right now?
Well, I tell you, for the 6.5 million refugees that have been displaced, their lives have changed dramatically, even though we don't see it as much in the press today. So, I mean, the effects of this unprovoked aggression by President Putin are, simply the biggest we've seen in our lifetime, you and I, Randy. Since World War II, there's not been this kind of destruction. So it's amazing. But just to give you a little backstory of our background, Intercessors for America with Ukraine, is we were actually approached a couple of years ago by a couple of leaders from Ukraine, church leaders, who said, we want to start Intercessors for Ukraine. And we thought, well, okay, we don't really do that, but gosh, we feel God behind this. And so we supported them and helped them build a web page and this and that. And they got prayer mobilized all across the country of Ukraine. And it was really amazing. And Randy, what's really cool in a way, difficult to talk about in another way, is their desire was to see a revival in the country of Ukraine, regardless of what it took. So now fast forward 2 years and it's incredible destruction, thousands of lives lost. And like I said, 6.5 million plus people have been displaced. And so we actually worked with a group of people to sponsor 1 million meals, if you can imagine that, boxed, bagged here in the U.S., flown over and delivered in Warsaw, Poland, and then shipped across the border. And then our Intercessors for Ukraine took those meals and distributed them all throughout the country, way in the far eastern side of the country, Sumy, Kharkiv, some in Kyiv.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I mean, it's our leader of Intercessors for Ukraine is from Sumy. And so anyways, long story short, when they present these foods, they're presenting the gospel. And men and women are coming to Christ right and left. They're saying it's a revival that's going on over there. People are crying out for desperation for hope from God. And so in the midst of all of the pain, difficulty, destruction, and death, God's still being glorified.
And on one hand, that doesn't surprise me because, it is sort of human nature is when things go bad, we look for hope. And fortunately, a lot of people do look to God. and in the cities you mentioned, well, I don't know if everybody knows the terrain of Ukraine, but I mean, you're talking in some really hard hit eastern areas where they're occupied right now. And there've been a lot of just horrible atrocities going on. What on the flip side of that, and this is not my view, obviously, but I could see how someone would say, "What, you started praying for Ukraine and then they got invaded and they're getting slaughtered? Where what kind of God is that lets that happen? Are you getting any of those deep, troubling questions that people are struggling with?"
Well, yeah. I mean, the question of pain and suffering, in humankind has been a question that, we've all raised before God. And I mean, there's evil. There's absolutely no doubt there's evil. Yeah. And really, to understand the conflict correctly, you need to understand President Putin's mindset and the Russian mindset. And it actually goes back centuries at this point to the czars and what I believe was a territorial spirit that was released into the lives of these czars that we know of in history to conquer and conquest the land. And so when the Soviet Union was broken up, it was a great devastation to this thought, this maybe territorial spirits. And as a result of that, they're using every attempt that they can in order to get this vast Soviet Union, this area of the globe that has been controlled by czars for centuries, back under their grips. So yeah, I mean, there's pain and suffering going on, and unfortunately, that's what the evil one does.
It's interesting that you frame it that way, and I have listened to some experts on Russia, and they say the same thing. Some of the historians, especially, how it was called the Soviet Union for a while, but it goes all the way back to the czars and this ambition for conquest.
Yep.
And you called it a spirit, which goes right to the heart of what you do, which is prayer, which is saying that we're fighting not just with tanks and bullets, but we're fighting, I don't know, there's this phrase I've heard, principalities and powers.
Yeah.
I very much see it that way. I'm guessing that's what your approach to warfare is we're not, you're providing meals, not tanks or bullets, but you're also fighting on a spiritual level.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I have not had great visions of what the spiritual realm looks like, but what I know is the scriptures, and the scriptures, like in Daniel, so it talks about a territorial spirit that Daniel was praying against, and how through Daniel's prayers and intercession that he released angelic beings to fight this spiritual battle that's going on behind the scenes. And of course, as you alluded to in the New Testament, talks about how we don't battle against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. And so, there's a spiritual element to everything in life, and especially in this particular instance.
Yeah, I want to show people the website. This is the website, ukrainemeals.com. If you want to help with Intercessors for America, provide ongoing meals to the refugees, you can do that. Of course, Life Outreach International is active. We've had life centers there for a couple decades now. Fortunately, they're on the western side, and some of the safe houses that we have are like overlook the Polish mountains, and so our guys are good. Now they've been going into Kyiv and some of the other areas, and so it's going to take a big team, and I think the church,
Absolutely.
You see anybody out there in the name of Jesus helping people in Ukraine, I would encourage you to be a part of that. Here's the website, by the way, ukrainemeals.com. I'll put that in the chat for those of you that can see the chat. I have a question from the audience on this idea of the territorial spirits. Who do you think's going to win in the short term here? Do you think Putin's going to be able to hold the land, I guess would be the question?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's recognize the miracle of such a small army of Ukraine fighting off supposedly a world power and delaying the conquest that Putin said it would take a couple of days to capture Kyiv. And here we are now, foreign consulates are moving their people back to Kyiv. And so, let's recognize that. But, I think it's going to be a slow slog. It's a very difficult position for NATO and for our administration to know how far to get involved, because it could quickly escalate into a much larger conflict, and we don't want that at all. So it's a fine balance. How do you protect freedom, and how do you protect the globe from a potential third world war? It's very difficult. So our president's been sending over hundreds of millions, billions at this point, of weapons, and that's really aided the Ukrainian army and provided them success. But Randy, I want to tell you this. So in the midst of that, the military, the intercessors have been praying, right? So the intercessors found out about a Russian airdrop of paratroopers that was scheduled. And so they got to their knees and started praying. And Randy, there was a wind that came up as soon as these paratroopers jumped out of the plane. This wind that was so strong that the wind blew them from Ukrainian territory back into Russia. So, God's being glorified through all of this.
It reminds me of Dunkirk.
Yeah.
Where you these things happen, and I've got an explanation for it. It was fog. It was wind. Okay. Yeah. Well, who creates? I know, right? Who creates the fog and the wind? And I think sometimes we rush to the scientific explanation, but when you look at the whole thread, and you go, okay, here's these people pleading to God, and then all of a sudden a wind comes up and blows the enemy, back to where they came from. You gotta just objectively. I mean, as a believer, I want to believe that that's God working in His ways. I think just objectively, you got to go, that's a little unusual. That's a little Dunkirkish, right? Right? I don't know that I don't know that I can just lean on my own understanding and completely follow that. So I think that's fabulous, and I think that's encouragement for us to continue.
No, absolutely.
To pray. Now, go ahead.
I just want to jump off on a topic that's not talked about much in the news, and it's the psychological warfare that President Putin is playing right now. Mm-hmm. As people are in those territories, those areas on the western side of the country, he's doing everything he can to scare them to stay in place. As you know, he's been bombing the green zones where peaceful civilians are able to leave. Yep. Recently, of course, he attacked the bus station, and I think it was 50 civilians were killed. He's doing all of this to get people to stay in place so that he can rule them. His generals, his armies are going into these cities, and the Russian military forces are saying to the local mayors of these cities, tell your people to stay where they are and no harm will come to them. It's all this psychological warfare that's going on in order for Putin, the territorial spirits, to come in and rule over these people.
That's very interesting. That's a great observation. And now I'll shift slightly, but in the same vein. I think we're seeing some of that in the West. This, what we call, gaslighting, psychological warfare, controlling the information, not letting you see both sides of an issue. It seems like there is a spirit of controlling not just territories but people's minds. What are you seeing on that front? I mean, and that dovetails right into what we're seeing with the battle over Twitter as well. It just seems like there is a real battle going on to control the way people think.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing to come out of this COVID cloud, and, the masks are off in airplanes, which I am so grateful for. And the day that the judge struck down that law, I was flying, and in the morning, everybody had masks. Yeah. By the evening, everybody had their masks off. And I was standing on one of the buses, standing next to this woman who was a nurse, and she was kind of, we were winking at each other because we had our masks off, and she came up and started talking to me, and she said she was a nurse in the military, and that she could not believe at the lack of critical thinking that occurred in the previous 2 years when it came to COVID. She just was, and we've seen it, we've heard it, but there's an eyewitness that described that. It is absolutely amazing, the cloud of confusion, the cloud of COVID cloud that was brought over so many countless millions, if not billions, in order to control them. It was amazing. Now we're able to come out of it a little bit and point at those different lines of misinformation or whatever.
Yeah. I was flying too. And when I landed, I got on a shuttle bus to go to a parking lot. And I just popped open, the news, and I saw that the judges struck that down. And I was like, they didn't tell us on my flight. We were masked the whole way. And I was like, and everybody is. I talked to some other guys because we had some people flying in for broadcast the same time I was flying, and they said, yeah, one guy, his first flight, I think DC to Atlanta, they were masked, and then his second flight, they weren't. And I was like, yeah, we didn't get the memo on mine. But, hey, when I bought the ticket, I agreed to wear a mask, so no harm, no foul.
I informed the crew on one flight what happened.
Oh, did you?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was so ready to take it off, and they said, well, until we get our, whatever. So right. Like, all right, whatever.
Yeah. But it's bigger than the mask thing, because I know people, and I know you do too. Maybe you're one of them who they're like, they hate the mask. I'm not wearing a mask. You're not gonna, And I'm like, whatever. To me, that's not the main thing. The main thing is truth and honesty and allowing people to critically think instead of just be.
I agree, Randy.
Hurted.
I agree.
It's crazy. The Twitter thing. You said to me before we started that you think this is a great thing for freedom, and I'm going,
oh my gosh,
it's sad when just being able to say a man is a man and a woman is a woman, or to say, even just to air your opinion. I don't think masks work. I mean, because that's what Fauci said before we started masking up,
Right.
Or marriages between a man and a woman, which is what Barack Obama said when he ran for president. It's like, but saying those things could get you kicked off a worldwide major platform that is kind of like a discussion point for everything. Yeah. But this is, how did we get to this point?
Well, the whole rule of thumb of the left is don't waste a perfectly good emergency. Yeah. And I mean, that's what we saw. I mean, they took this supposed emergency of COVID, which is real, but, they took it and they used every opportunity to take away our rights. And, us at Intercessors for America, I'm sure you guys have too, Randy, we've been praying that the long-term effects of our freedoms, religious freedoms, freedoms of speech, et cetera, would not be affected over the long term. And lo and behold, here comes Elon Musk. We were talking off the air. I recently wrote an article in Musk We Trust before his acquisition of Twitter was completed. And I tell you, I feel like there's a breath of fresh air just in the last 24 hours. People are testing these keywords that would have got them kicked off 48 hours ago, and they're not getting kicked off. It's all about the ability to express our point of views and freedoms. Our founding fathers believed, and you and I, Randy, we believe that it's God that gives us rights, and it's government that has to implement God's rights. And God has freedom in his heart for us. And I think it's a fabulous day.
There's also been a lot of stuff about, Christian nationalism, things about that. Do you see America different in the way it was founded from other nations in a way that is biblically significant?
Oh, yeah, I don't even know where to begin on that. So let's start with the Declaration of Independence, that our Creator has given us rights. No other country has their founding documents with that statement. And those rights are for freedom for all. I mean, that just is not out there.
Is that not coming from the Magna Carta? Is that not in English and Canadian and maybe even like Australian? I don't know. I'm asking.
Well, there are some of those statements, yeah, and you're right. In the Magna Carta, it goes all the way back, but it is not a part of a founding document of a nation that then goes and writes a constitution that is still in effect this day.
Wow.
So there were elements of that. You're exactly right. And then you apply on top of that the founders of our nation that wrote our Constitution. And just for example, the separation, you asked, is it biblical? So the separation of powers that's detailed out in our Constitution, that comes from Isaiah 33:22, that says that our Lord will be our judge, our lawmaker, and our king. These founding fathers of our country, they grew up after a great revival. And so they largely had a biblical worldview. They understood the sinful nature of man. They understood that power corrupts an individual. So a separation of powers was absolutely critical in order for our government to remain pure. So, I mean, I could continue to talk about the biblical elements that are within the structure of our nation. Go to the amendments. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and may the government not establish a state church. So those are just some thoughts.
What are Dave Kubal's, the CEO of Intercessors for America, what is your prayer for the elections coming up in the fall?
Well, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
There you go.
God's values to be expressed through our government.
Yeah, what do you say to the average person? Because, gosh, there's there's a lot to be prayerful about. What do you? I don't know. This may be a dumb question. I'll risk it. Do you have sort of priorities list? I mean, because you're talking abortion, you're talking the gender confusion out there. You're talking, I don't know, Supreme Court packing. Maybe there's a lot of issues that I think Americans should be concerned about, and our voice is at the ballot box largely. Do you have sort of a top 5, top 10 kind of approach?
Yeah, I've never really thought about it that way, but as you listed off those different issues and you think of, look at the scriptures. I mean, God created us male and female. Yeah. So gender issues needs to be, very high. God created and protected life. So life's got to be very high on our list. And I think that, well, let me answer the question this way. I live in Virginia. I live in Loudoun County. And as you know, it's kind of the epicenter of a lot of things that happen, including the incredible wave of conservative wins in politics in the state of Virginia last fall. And it all came to a head, and you could hear the air go out of the Youngkin's opponent's campaign when he said that parents should not have rights into what their kids are being taught at schools. Craziness. Yeah. And when I saw that clip, I didn't watch the debate live. When I saw that clip, I thought, this is it. They spoke what is unspoken. He spoke what is unspoken. And to me, that was the turning point. You see, for the progressive left, politics is their religion and government is their church. And so they try to implement their values through government, and people had enough. And I believe that in Virginia is what we will see across this nation. People of faith, people not of faith, doesn't matter. People are tired of the leftist agenda that is so extreme and squelches their freedom so much that they're saying, no more. We're not going to do it anymore.
Yeah. All right. I got a softball question for you. You'll like this one. What do you say to the Christians, not the people who are not Christians, who don't recognize the Bible as any kind of authority, don't even believe in God? To the Christians, what do you say to the Christians who say, well, Jesus didn't run for office. Christians, we just need to stay out of politics. This world is going to burn. It's going to hell. We just need to step back and stay out of it. What do you say to those Christians?
No, I get fired up. Related to that is Jesus is coming back tomorrow. Why should we care about today?
Yeah, well, fortunately, I'm not a dispensationalist. I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. Well, Jesus says we should be salt and light, and we should make a difference, and we should make disciples of all people. So why is that just limited to within the four walls of the church? That does not make any sense at all. God created three institutions, very clear in Scripture. He created the family, He created the church, and He created government. In Romans chapter 13, verse 1 says that God has created all authority. And if you go further down, I think it's verse 7 or 8, it describes very specifically what government is for, and that is to protect the innocent from evil. That's pretty much it. And so unless governmental leaders understand what evil is, they're not going to be able to protect us from that. And in order for a person to come to the conclusion that government is ungodly, they've got to ignore so much of the scriptures. It's really not a valid point. In fact, if you look at our nation, this point was not even valid until the Johnson Amendment came and put this blinder over the church in the 1950s that said that we can't speak about politics in the church. It's ridiculous. It's within the last 50, 60 years. And I believe that people are just fed up with it. And I believe that there's going to be a revival of people spilling out of the church into the civic arena, making a difference.
To those who are afraid of religious influence in government life, as one who is involved in it, head of your organization, someone who's right there near D.C., someone who's active in things that we would call political, which I believe is a little bit of a chain. It's really much bigger than that. What would you, if you as a Christian had your way with the government and the way it ruled, what would that look like? Because there's legitimately some people, because of the echo chambers they've been in, they're afraid we're going to be, it's like a Christian Taliban. That was a phrase that was kicked around for a while. What's the biblical view of governing people, even when the people are not all Christians?
Well, you've asked a couple different questions there. But very simply, to answer your question, what do I want from government? Leave me alone. Huh? Let me be free. Let me worship my God the way I want to worship. Yeah. And, if you look at the distinction between the Pilgrims and the Puritans, this is really the distinction that was going on. The Puritans had this view that the church could influence government in order to implement the church's values. And on the flip side of it, you got the Pilgrims who came over and said, we just want to be free. Just leave us alone. We want religious freedoms. And so I definitely go with that point of view of the Pilgrims, that just let me be. Just let me worship my God my way. And don't tell me that my kids have got to learn these rules and whatever. Now, the sticking points are what happens when you have to talk about moral issues such as life, in the protection of life in the womb. And it's at those levels that you need to really have God give wisdom to governmental leaders to protect the innocent, to protect the most innocent, for those that are within the womb. So there's two different levels there. And at the highest level, protection of the innocent is what's most important.
That's very interesting, because a President Kubal would say, let me worship as I want, and let the mosque down the street operate freely, and let the Jewish temple operate freely, and let the atheists stay at home and watch golf on television, And I think if people understood that, that clarity, because I'm with you right there, but yet protect the innocent, right? Then I think we come to a lot more agreement. All right, before I let you go, I got to let you go quick. I want to show ifapray.org. This is the website, and just give me a real quick, what do you want people to do? What can they do to help support what you do?
Well, you got to understand Intercessors for America is three things: news, prayer, and action. We are a source of biblical news from a prayerful perspective. There's a community of people praying pretty much around the clock, hundreds of thousands of us that are praying together. And then we encourage people that once they hear from the Lord to be involved with their legislators and lawmakers. So go to IFA Pray and get involved in news, prayer, and action by signing up.
Absolutely. Dave, thank you for your time. You need to go. You have another interview, so I will say goodbye to you. And
right,
for
buddy.
those of you,
Yes,
thank you. For those of you watching, get involved, man. Don't give up. Don't get disheartened. Appreciate you being a part of Life Today Live. Come back. We got more great interviews for you. We'll see you again next time. Let me get some good music. Here's some good music right there. We'll see you again next time here on Life Today Live.
We have an opportunity to make America a better nation. All we say to America, be true to what you said on paper.